So let's jump in. So good morning again. My name is Carl Slater, and I will be the facilitator for this morning's workshop entitled Room for Error, the Importance of Student Miscues. So as you derived in the synopsis of the presentation, right? It's in best interest, right, for us as adult educators to make peace with our students making errors in our classroom, right? Or even better yet, welcome them into the entire learning process and cycle. You know, creating these error-friendly or miscue-friendly classrooms will not only help your students develop the skills necessary for future success, however that may look, but it also encourages them to have healthy mindsets that accepts and learn from moments of unsuccess. So if you haven't done so, please feel free to answer the true/false question on the screen in the chat. And the question is, well, errors committed with high confidence are corrected more readily than low confidence errors. Well, let's take a few seconds to type our feedback in the chat. Kathleen, I see a question mark. Do you have a question?
No, I'm just not sure. I have low confidence in my answer.
Mr. Slater, sir.
Yes.
Also, you can use your body language and tone of voice are key components. And also, when you make a correction, you do it gently. If they use the wrong symbol present, he live in New York City or he lives. You put them on the spot. You give the speaker a choice. You use it. You have to rely on your body language and tone of voice, and you give a student an option. Don't necessarily correct on the spot, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks, Robert. Actually, save that thought because our first activity is going to be thinking about those nonverbal, right, communications that we give our students, sometimes unknowingly, right? That can also affect student mindset as far as critically thinking through questions. So yeah, so save that thought. Thanks for thinking ahead.
73855 Moravian communication model. You've heard of that, sir? 7% of communication is verbal, 38% is voice tone, 55% body language, sir. Are you familiar with the Moravian communication model?
I believe I have heard that. So yeah, which I also agree with.
I learned that when I was in Korea, sir, when I taught English in Korea for 10 years.
Okay, so thank you so much for participating in the chat. I see it's a bit of a mixed bag. I see some truths, mostly false though. So we're going to unpack that a little later, coming up in the upcoming slides. So, overall, in any educational setting, the biggest challenge for us as educators, or one of the biggest challenges, is really teaching students what to do when they don't know what to do, right? So in this workshop, we're going to talk through some instructional strategies and systems that are needed for this, productive struggle to take place within our adult learners, and also thinking about how we can provide, safe learning spaces, right, for our students to learn to persist and to become those expert learners. Even thinking about Malcolm Knowles, right, the modern father for andragogy, right, the study of teaching adults. Right, he says that experience, right, which we know experience comes with errors, trial and errors, right, is the basis for learning activities and is one of the foundational learner characteristics related to motivation, right, within adult learners. Right. So, but however, you know, as we're talking through this fear of failure, right, is very real and deep seated into our students' beings, right, even our own beings, right. This fear of failure is directly related to notions of, you know, you think of, you know, self-worth and, you know, how valuable you believe you are as a person. And research has found that when students with school anxieties, right, interact with structured learning environments, there's a, a fear center in the brain that is activated, right? And it's in the same location that's sort of like, you know, initiated and activated when some people see like snakes or spiders, right? It's that fear center, that fight or flight, right? And it's in this fear of being you know, outed as, you know, from and making a mistake, you know, this fear of being viewed as, you know, incompetent or, you know, lesser than or not on par where you should be, uh, that leads some of our students down, you know, this sort of trauma-filled spiral, right, of inadequacies and other, you know, classroom disruptions and other barriers that we may see present themselves in our classrooms. So, you know, as this fear center of the brain becomes activated, right, the activity in these problem-solving locations in our brain, you know, become diminished, right? We don't really think as critically as we would like to. And so what I'm trying to say is that this fear of failure shuts down parts of the brain that are needed to demonstrate competency, right, within these structured learning environments that we present our students. So again, this fear, right, is related to implicit theories of intelligence, where individuals, right, can be placed on a continuum according to their implicit views of where ability comes from, right? Many of us may know this as, you know, growth mindset. So, you know, with that being said, and, you know, notice I use the word continuum so that we do not assume the binary nature of this slide, you know, implies any static nature of these ideas within the growth and fixed mindset. It's a spectrum. It's not either or you can become one more than the other, or you can become one more than the other, and you can be dissected, right, by topic, and it's nuanced by topic. So people operating right in the fixed mindset end of this continuum are so afraid of making mistakes that they have a tendency to try to hide the mistakes, right, or blame others for their errors. You know, these folks are much more concerned with how they will be judged, rather than how they will improve. A fixed mind state is the belief that you were born a certain way and cannot change, right? Everything is about the outcome. If you fail or if you're not the best, it's all been a waste, right? Alternatively, right, thinking about the growth mindset end of the spectrum, right? Students are committed to taking responsibility for, as well as learning from set mistakes. Students who are within the growth mindset, right, they enjoy to try new strategies and commit to taking on new challenges, and to, you know, execute a variety of approaches until they achieve a goal. Right, the growth mindset is that this belief that you can grow your brain and that your intelligence grows with effort, right? So as per Carol Dweck, you know, the psychologist who coined the terms growth and fixed mindset, right? The growth mindset allows people to value what they're doing regardless of the outcome, So when students fear making errors in our class, right, essentially it jeopardizes their success. Alternatively, on the other end of that, when our students realize that they can not only learn from, but actually embrace, right, mistakes, they become more resilient and more motivated and more innovative in their problem solving strategies. So when we're evaluating and providing feedback to student mistakes or student miscues, the first thing we need to do is to determine whether the miscue is a mistake or an error, right? So, you think of mistakes, we all make them, and they're often a result of a lack of attention. Excuse me. The important thing to know about mistakes is that when they're pointed out, students are capable of immediate correction, right? We're talking about mistakes. The student possesses the knowledge base, right, to self-correct the mistake. For example, right, if you point out a misspelled word, right, or a mispronunciation, or a grammar, something in grammar, and the student automatically recognizes it and immediately corrects it, it was a simple mistake. We often recognize these mistakes because they are uncharacteristic of what we know the student can do. An error, on the other hand, right, is a lack of knowledge, right? Even when the error is identified for the student, they still aren't quite sure how to correct it, right? The student may lack the skills or concepts necessary to approach the solution in any other way that they did than they did on their first attempt. We also know that when students make errors, they must be followed up with positive corrective feedback. Research illustrates that these beneficial effects are amplified when students strongly believe that their error is correct, right? So this is called the hyper correction effect, in which students get an internal shock, right, or surprise, or perhaps embarrassment at having made an error on a response that they strongly thought was correct. Therefore, going back to our first slide, it is true that errors committed with high confidence are corrected more readily than low confidence, because current research states that this hypercorrection effect, sends this shock to the body, which immediately rectifies this misinformation. So, oh, yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking, this is not true, I don't think, in something like politics or media, newspaper, media people will say, that MAGA supporters believe in this. When they believe in it very strongly. When you tell them they are wrong, sometimes they say they see it, but then they continue to practice the errors. So isn't that an example of errors committed with high confidence are not correctable? Because the belief kind of supersedes the correction.
True. Okay. So yes. So I guess that is a valid point when you think about
Counterexample.
politics.
Yeah.
However, when in the act of learning something, right? If you're trying to learn something, you're seeking out the truth, right? That's the whole learning process. If you're choosing not to seek out the truth, and if you're taking things for face value as it is, right? That's not a learning environment.
Okay. I accept that.
I don't have any Trump supporters in my class.
You never know. I mean, really, you never know. I've been surprised sometimes. So, and you know, you have to be even-handed. So, you know, the mistake can probably be in among non-Trump supporters too. You know, the belief kind of supersede, but I accept the idea that if you're not looking to learn, you're gonna just, you know, keep your model in your head. But if you're open to learning, you can accept the correction.
Right, right.
I really tell my students it's really okay to make mistakes, and it's by making
Right.
mistakes that you actually learn.
Absolutely.
And that often if you're confused, it's out of confusion that comes understanding, like the world comes out of chaos. So I just always in my class try to just try to let students know that they're really welcome to make mistakes, because that's how you
Right.
learn.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
And I
but
teach
sometimes there's a
ESL, so
cultural resistance, but
yes.
yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I
Alright,
say
Ms.
it's better to commit, I'll shut up in a, it's better to commit errors than have everything correct all the time, but you don't really have a fundamental understanding until you see the contrast. So,
Right.
What about when teachers make mistakes? This is kind of, I know this is not germane, but what about when teachers make a mistake and make the correction and admits it?
I do that
That's
all
good.
the time.
yeah.
I think that's a great thing
positive.
to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I second that. I think that you know, and we're actually going to talk about this a little later on, but right, modeling, right, that thinking process, that trial and error, right, goes a long way within our classrooms. So, you know, regardless of how confident, right, one can be in their responses, right, this process of actively pushing the brain to reconcile contradictory information, right? So current research in this neuroplasticity, right, highlights that errors set off an almost instantaneous chain reaction of productive brain activity. Even before the conscious mind is aware of the error, research has found a set of neurons that, you know, we'll call error neurons, who are the neural forerunners, right, of error, begin to fire, right? These error neurons begin to fire. Almost instantaneously, a formation of what we'll call conflict neurons respond, right? Signaling the brain's effort to resolve inconsistent pieces of information. And it's this like rapid fire succession of these neurons in which the brain lights up with this kind of activity that encodes information more deeply. So the question is now, I should say, how can we get our students, right, to optimize this neural activity to constantly resolve false or faulty information naturally without this sense of public embarrassment? So first, you know, let's start off with, we'll say, a general understanding that getting answers right doesn't reflect authentic long-term learning, right? I see a lot of head nods, so we're all in agreement with that. You know, as educators, the questions we want to engage our students in are the ones that are more difficult, than what they would find in a typical exam, but not so challenging that they would give up on. Right? Again, research in neuroscience tells us that brains grow neural pathways when we are at the edge of challenge. Right? This is often referred to as the Goldilocks principle. Right? Not too easy, not too hard, just right type of thing. Now, with this Goldilocks principle, right, it leads us into another term that's used within our community called the zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development refers to the optimum learning space where a student engages with tasks that are beyond what they have the skill to accomplish alone. But they can accomplish it with a more knowledgeable guide that supports their productive struggle with appropriate scaffolding, such as us, the educator, the teacher, assisting them, and also through independent learning activities as well. So again, just highlighting on this zone of proximal development, or ZPD for short. A good problem is one that is not a single correct method to solve, right? But it's the thinking process and procedure itself is open-ended so that students explore a multitude of possibilities and drawing on those multitudes and making connections with prior knowledge, right? Again, so when the problem is too easy, students can immediately recall information, right? Or it's not dynamic enough to explicit a diversity in perspectives or responses. But when the problem is too hard or too challenging, students are forced to evaluate several possible answers and helping them better differentiate and understand those very concepts or methods. So now the question is, well, how do I get my students to begin thinking within this zone of proximal development, right? What activities can I incorporate in my classroom to get these students, progressing through their ZPDs? So the first thing we'll talk about is what doesn't work, right, within this zone of proximal development. So sometimes, as educators, we make declarations or unconscious statements that sometimes can aggravate anxiety among our students. So on the screen, you'll see, there's a few statements that I believe we should avoid, right, making them in class so that students can see themselves as expert learners, right? So the first statement is, this is easy, right? So sometimes, it can slip out sometimes, you may say it to a student one-on-one, but many students decide at a young age that they just aren't good students, right? And then they carry that sentiment on with them through their educational journeys and their adult lives. So, imagine sitting in a class where, number one, you've never felt confident in your entire experience in a classroom setting. And the teacher tells you how easy something is or how easy a problem is. By calling it easy, we devalue that experience of those students who find it difficult and create a space that does not welcome their struggle or their inquiry into understanding. So, we cannot create these spaces and convince our students that they are already too far behind when we call things easy. Right. Another phrase that we've heard is, you're so smart, right? Positive praise must be a huge part in our approach of teaching, right, in classroom management. I agree. However, the praise should be for specific replicable behaviors, not for, quote unquote, intelligence. When a student who feels unresolved hears something another student being praised for being so smart for, it only reinforces that student's belief that some people are just smarter than the others, right? Thinking back to that fixed mindset, right? So this is not only false, but it's destructive, right? To embed these sentiments in our classroom. And then, I can look at another statement. Let's see, you should already know this, right? One thing that I've struggled with in my own teaching, and if you agree, let me know, but is how to teach at grade level content when students have gaps in their fundamental skills. Math, for example, is so heavily based on extending basic skills to more and more advanced topics that it can feel challenging for students to get better. Saying something like, you should already know this to a group of students, not only reaffirms that students thought that they will never be good at math, but it also places blame on the students for something that probably wasn't even their fault to begin with. By the time, you know, our learners reach our class, they are likely to know where they are behind with the content and do not need their self-confidence, you know, further hindered by statements like, you should already know this. Right, so again, rather than praising students for their intelligence and talent, praise them for their hard work, right? Determination, attention to detail, communication skills, or you know, ability to work with others, right? When considering how to offer praise in a classroom, make sure that whatever you're praising, right, any student in the room feels capable of replicating. Right? If you cannot observe it, it shouldn't be measured. You know, I even reflect on like my own teaching experiences and how it always sort of tickled my students when I told them, you know, as I'm a former math teacher, and it always sort of tickled my students when I would tell them that I was never, you know, a good math student growing up. You know, never, ever, ever in grade school. I was never a good math student. But I would tell them that, you know, it wasn't because, you know, in reflection on my experience, I realized that it wasn't because I was bad at math, right? But it was because my teachers made me feel that I was bad at math, right? So it's imperative that we as teachers, as educators, hold one another accountable for what we say to students. So I want to encourage you to avoid, you know, using similar statements. Okay, so this is now leading us into our first activity. If you have a phone, you know, there's a QR code on the screen. You are welcome to participate in the activity on your phone. I'm placing the link in the chat for everyone to see. So in this activity, I want us to think about examples of positive constructive feedback or process praises, you know, which we've seen on the slide. You know, what are some sample statements that we can make in our classroom so that we're not triggering trauma within our students when they're making mistakes or errors, but instead we're encouraging them to acknowledge the error as a positive thing, and we're encouraging them to persist through and to maybe try something different, or let them know that they're on the right track and that they should keep going. So on the screen, I placed some example statements that I have used in my experience, you know, to get students to continue working within their ZPD levels, right? And everybody, once you have access to this document, you have access to incorporate your own statements into this Padlet. Now, what I want us to do, I want us to take a few minutes, and I want us to incorporate our own statements, right? Because at the end, I'm going to share these statements out so that we now have, you know, either sentence stems or, you know, examples of motivational declarations that we can turnkey and give, you know, immediately in our classrooms to help students, you know, continue to persist and to be resilient within the learning process. So we'll take a few minutes. I see some people are writing their responses, so that's great. And now to Robert's point in the beginning, right? Also think about the nonverbal cues that that also, you know, play a part within this positive constructive feedback, right? What is your tone of voice? You know, how fast are you walking? You know, what are your hand gestures? Think about the pace of your voice. what are ways that when students are in that zone, they're not quite sure, how can we get students to persist and to continue thinking through and to become those expert learners and to develop those skills? So yeah, so I see a lot of great ideas. I like how you provided evidence. Great, great, great. Oh, I see gather wrong answers. Right, so again, thinking later in our presentation, we're going to talk about how we talk through wrong answers. They're all piling up on one another.
How do I annotate on this thing?
You want to place a
Yes.
statement on the Padlet
Yes.
in the lower right-hand corner.
Okay. I just did, okay, yeah, and then
There's a plus sign.
I just did, okay, yeah, I put the plus sign.
And then publish.
Right, once you click the
Publish, edit, with the, oh, okay, all right, subject, all right. I can't type on this thing. Write something fantastic. I can't, I'm sorry, I don't know how to, I don't use Padlet.
Hit the publish. When you
Where?
write in the box, hit the publish.
Edit, where's publish?
Publish is in mine, it's upper right-hand corner.
All
in
right,
red.
and there's my box, and then there's a subject pops up. Write something incredible. I can't do, all right. Wait, I don't know, I can't find it.
Here,
Where's
right,
publish?
look on the screen. You see how
I don't use Padlet. I don't use Padlet.
I
Oh,
love
publish.
Padlet.
All right, publish.
This is a great example of a time when somebody might be struggling in a learning experience and they need that kind of positive feedback, but we can do this together, Robert.
I don't know. I pressed on, you know what?
If you click on the plus, you just have to write anything into the box that you want. Just do a practice one. Don't even worry about making it good. Just write anything into the box, and then you'll see the publish box button open up. But this is a good example where somebody's getting frustrated because they feel like everyone else can do it and they can't. So this is exactly what Carl's talking about.
And then edit. And I pressed the plus.
Yeah, don't worry about edit. I mean, I don't think you have to worry about edit.
I can't see nothing. I don't see anything. I put plus.
Plus, do you see the little pencil?
Yeah, and there's a little pencil, yeah.
Right, hit the pencil and you get a box.
The box isn't showing up.
It's all right, Robert. What I suggest, write your statements in the chat, and what I will do is I will add them to the Padlet so that when I send out the link, your statements will also be included too.
Because you said learning takes time, but not during a test, an exam, and a quiz. Because
Not a quiz, it's not an exam.
That's right. It's because learning takes time, but not in a quiz, not in a midterm, not in a final exam, and not when you have a lot of homework assignments. It's a marathon and it's not a sprint. You got to say that. I always say that to my students. That we all learn different levels, different approaches. You got to say that.
Just give it a try.
And I don't know. I'm trying. Okay. This is not. I clicked on the.
Well, you're getting familiar with how it looks, so that's a start.
I've used Padlet, but I don't use it habitually.
As Carl said, put it in the chat and he'll
Okay. All
put
right.
it in with everybody else's.
Transfer. Yeah.
Yeah, so, we are going to move on, but thank you so much for everybody for their comments. As I said, I will share this out in our debrief. And these are great sentence starters.
Carl, can I just point out a couple of questions that I'm not sure you answered earlier?
Yes.
So Chris Lobo asked earlier in the chat, how can one ID if an answer is high or low confidence?
Sure. Well, the research that that measured this, it was self-reported. So honestly, you can ask your students, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident you are if you're trying to experiment yourself with this idea of high confidence and low confidence.
And then there was another question from Brianna Logan. How do you help your students regain trust in you when you make a mistake? Oftentimes teachers want students to trust them, to help them become successful learners, but teachers make mistakes too because it is part of being human, but mistakes also create a lack of trust in any relationship. So the question is, how do you help your students regain trust in you when you make a mistake?
Sure. I think, in the process of making a mistake, you don't have to lose trust as long as you're honest and open about the process of making the mistake and the process of going about to correct it and to reconcile that. So no trust has to be lost as long as you're not open and as long as you're open and honest with the mistake. So this is great. So, those statements and the gestures that we just embedded in the Padlet, right? They help our students develop intrinsic curiosity, right? And it increases their, we'll say, tolerance for uncertainty. And as we know, intrinsic curiosity is a good indicator for sustained student engagement and long-term learning retention. Okay, another way we
I have a question if you don't mind before you go on.
No, sure.
I understand, when students make a mistake or they make an error, but sometimes they do either one by guessing. How do you address when a student gets it right when they guess, or they get it wrong when they guess? In other words, you're judging them on whether they got it right or wrong. Maybe they just guessed at the answer and they say, "Oh, look at this! Wow, I got it right." But they only guessed at it. They had no idea about how to reproduce that answer. If they get it wrong, the same thing happens, and then they'll just retry again, getting the wrong answer over and over again because they're just guessing. So I know what I do in my classroom. I used to do, at least I'm retired now. But how would you address this? Getting the answer right, getting the answer wrong, but the students actually guessing.
Sure. So I think, in the learning process, right, a part of that process is understanding how to get to the solution, right? So asking students about their problem-solving strategies, right? How did you come to that conclusion, right? What evidence did you use? Really poking and prying into that process of how did they develop the answer, right? Gives you a lot of insight into their thinking and to their understanding whether it was a guess or they were actually, employing critical thinking skills.
I understand that as a math teacher, you would probably be able to do that with students, but I'm an English teacher. I teach English as a second language, and it's very difficult for students to, to come to that conclusion. I'm just going to, just tell you that what I do is I usually teach the process, and then I reinforce it, and I teach it and reinforce it, and then I test them by asking them yes and no answers, and the questions, and then they answer yes, and I said, so why did you say yes? So you see, for me, I can do that in the classroom verbally, but as a math teacher, I think you have one up on me because you can actually say, how did you derive that answer, right? But in English, it's kind of difficult. So I was wondering, do you have any other suggestions? Because that's what I do, and it really works. I ask them yes, no question, they answer one, and I said, they're guessing. It's easy to answer yes, no question, but then when you ask them to qualify it or quantify it, It's very difficult for them to do. And then you go up and you go process and repeat what you've already taught them and say, then now and then they see it again and again, and then they begin to get their answer without guessing. Do you have
Yeah.
other suggestions?
It's a good point. So I guess to that point, I say, when you think about evidence, right? Evidence is not just numbers, particularly when you're thinking about ESL or, ELA, evidence comes into the form of context, keywords, the sequence, right, of the writing or the prompt. So evidence can look very different depending on the subjects that we teach.
Thank you.
Also, Carl, what about also with essays and paragraphs? They say that you do not make corrections when you grade paragraphs and essays. You point out these are the errors. What do you think about that, Carl? For grading?
Well, again, I think the important part is to figure out how students came to their product, or their essay, and thinking about the resources that they use, and understanding the gaps in knowledge, and to really, as the educator, provide them the resources and the tools to to engage in the activity and to make those corrections.
But don't make the corrections for them. Like, these are the mistakes, and maybe give a slight hint.
Correct, right. Proper scaffolding, right, is key. Okay, so another way that we can keep students within our ZPD, right, is through gamification. So games, right, as an instructional delivery method, right, has the potential really to, I want to say, keep learners engaged and interested in a variety of ways, right? So many adults, right, currently, play video games or computer games already, right? And it's this idea of thinking about, like, well, in that video game process, like, once the player engagement or interest is sparked, right? Games can enhance to learning by increasing time spent on tasks, maintaining motivation, right? Long-term motivation, and encouraging self-regulated activities, right? Within games, right? These low-risk environments not only encourage, right, experimentation through, thinking processes, right? But it also provides corrective feedback and analysis on the impact of decisions far faster than one could experience in real world situations. Right, and also I want to make a point, touch on it briefly, that this idea of gamification also spills into social emotional learning, right? Through the various ways that we can see on the screen, through cognitive learning, emotional and social. Okay, so now let's demo a gamified instructional strategy. So on the screen, you see 5 shuffled comic strip panels that once you place them correctly, will communicate a coherent peanut story, Charlie Brown. So I want us to use the context within the panels and whatever other strategies that you have at your disposal, but place the panels in the correct order, right? Thinking about the numbers. So you can say, okay, the correct order is 3, 5, 1, 2, 4, or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Let's take a second or take a minute to figure out the correct order and, place them in the chat. And it's just the sequence of numbers. And as you're going through this activity, think about what skills you used in order to get the correct sequence. What evidence in the panels did you use? All right, great. I see people plugging away. All right, so the correct order was 24153. And now, so I want to take a second. So even if you're like, let's say, what skills did you use? Even if you did not get the correct order of the comic strip, what skills did you use to place them in the correct order? Right, feel free to come off mute and share your process. Because these are the same process. These are transferable into the classroom when you're looking at academic texts.
So I think it's interesting that more than one answer could have been correct. I'm looking at, as I was looking at other people's, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense also. Oh, that makes sense. I wanted it to end with a joke. So the 3 had to come at the end, but I used things like first, now to kind of, and I still got it wrong. But I was looking for those clues, like of which came first, but it had to end with a joke. So that's why I thought 3 had to come at the end.
Oh, great. Thanks, Susanna. Yeah. So right, understanding the context, right? You have the the background knowledge to know that the Peanuts is a comic strip, is a joke. So you're expecting the joke at the end. So incorporating that context, you can already see what the last slide is going to be. And then again, thinking about the order, the chronologically, how you structure a thought, right? You have first, then it's now, right? So again, very great, very good, thank you. And you can see these are the same skills that you would employ, if instead of a comic strip, let's say it was a jumbled essay passage. Right, I had another activity in which we were going to, actually do it with an essay passage. Unfortunately, it appears that we won't have enough time to get through this activity, but I will share it so you can use this to model and turnkey it in our own classrooms. So yeah, so great job. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so this is something that has come up several times within this presentation today, and it's like, well, what do you do if you as the educator make the mistake? Right, so I think that it's important, particularly within the preparation, right, of a lesson, of one's instruction, right, is to create this culture of openness and honesty of mistakes. In fact, and when teachers have to communicate that you not only embrace errors, but actively model a tolerance for errors and mistakes. As teachers, again, we want to regularly, continuously model these errors for our students. So again, thinking about like, what does this look like? The thinking process is messy, right? To get down to the nitty gritty of it, it's messy. You're starting, you're stopping, you're trying, you're trying again, you're trying something different, right? It's not a linear process. And we have to model this for our students, because many students, may possibly believe that learning is a linear process. And that assumption leads them into that fixed mindset, in which if I can't do it my first time, I just can't do it. Right. So as educators, we should not try to hide this, right? But instead we want our students to see that I too, right, wrestle with getting ideas on paper or getting the correct process. So again, this goes back to preparation, right? Teacher preparation. Follow a plan to ensure that you're modeling the type of thinking you intended, right? This includes, right, curating questions you're asking to students, curating the answers that you plan to give to the students, and curating the conversations accordingly. Right? Through this process, this actively modeling, you want to stay in character. Remember, thinking from the learner's point of view, not just the teacher. And you're pretending, I don't want to say pretending, but you're working through a text or a task for the first time. And you want to model the types of thinking you expect from the students, right? So like a good learner, right? And I'm sure many of us do this already, but we're asking ourselves questions, right? Verbalize that inner dialogue, right? What is the author trying to tell me? Is that a clue about what's going to happen next? Actively communicate that. Don't just assume our students, have these skills, already. And narrate your actions, such as, I better write this down. Or, well, that didn't work. Let me erase that step and try something else. Right? Actively modeling critical thinking. Let the students see and hear you struggle, right, with your thinking. It's important for them to see that all learners encounter challenges and that it's okay. But they also need to see the strategies that good learners use to overcome challenges. So not only verbalizing it, right, but to model, right, that metacognitive thinking that good learners use to overcome challenges, right? So, to wrap this up, model perseverance by building in some unsuccessful attempts, right? Preparation, build in unsuccessful attempts, and give yourself a little pep talk after each one, right? Okay, so now let's talk through some examples about what this looks like in practice. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but how many times in our classrooms have we posed a question to a student or to our classroom, and lo and behold, every single answer is represented, amongst our students. Right, very similar to the jigsaw activity, right, with the comic strips. You're going to get a multitude of responses to a question. And it's important that you take the time to walk through the thinking process and the steps of each response and acknowledging those errors. So this example I pulled from is a sample GED math question. And each student has a different answer, and you can see each student went about getting their answer a different way. You can model this with your students and say, okay, well, what did student A do wrong, right? Where do you see student A's error? And even with, even eliciting those responses, you're going to get, a multitude of responses, but you can see student A does not have the correct amount of hours.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be better, rather than telling you that student A had an error, to be more positive, like you had mentioned before, positive reinforcement and positive, feedback and stuff like that? instead of saying, student A has an arrow, maybe poll the class and ask them, what is the problem or what is good and what's bad about student A? And then student A won't feel so bad about the fact that they made an error because you're telling everyone it's an error to begin with. You see what I'm saying?
Right. Okay, so that's a good point. So let me correct what's being shown on the screen. So this is an activity, right, that you can pose to your students in which you can say, okay, well, here's 4 responses and 4 different ways of getting those responses. Tell me which one is correct, right? So we're not singling out single students, right? This is a curated activity that you can pose to your class, right? Like a which one doesn't belong type of activity, in which you're asking the students, tell me which one is right and tell me why that response is right and identify errors in the other responses.
Thank you. That's how I would do it. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. No, I apologize. I misspoke. But this is a curated activity that I'm demonstrating for you. Because it's in the error identification process, which also allows learners, to think through it, the next time that they're posed the same question. Practicing this analysis allows them to practice it themselves internally.
What about, saying something like, how did you come up with 5? How did you come up with 7? How did you come up with 13 or whatever it was? Because I have found sometimes when I think a student has made an error and I ask them why, it turns out they were correct and I was not. So I'm kind of asking them to think through the process, and then there you had 2 7s. So why, how come you have different answers, but you use the same, division numbers? So, how did you come up with, not say it in a derogatory way, but just ask them, because again, I have found sometimes they're right and I'm wrong.
Right.
And I'm illuminated by how they did it.
Yeah, and I think a great practice in our classrooms is, regardless of whether the student got the answer correct or incorrect, ask them, how did you get there? What processes, what evidence did you use? Right. This is a practice that has to be modeled continuously in the classroom.
Right. Thank you.
So, even thinking about, a more of an ELA, right, example of this. Walk through, right, the key words within the responses, one by one, really have those conversations with the students. Well, what is scatteredly random? What does that mean compared to distributed equally or mostly located? Like, what's the difference? So, there's declarative and procedural knowledge, inquiries that you can make. Okay, and our final strategy is called Get the Gist. So GIST is an acronym for generating interactions between schemata and text, right? It's a mouthful. But it's a summarizing strategy that requires the students to pare down information, right? To summarize information so that they've talked about or read into in 20 words or less. Right, so it's a very versatile strategy that can be used across subject matters and is an effective tool at developing error resilience, right, through low stakes trial and error. GIST summaries also provide direct opportunities for us to circulate in the class, observe students, and offer individual remediation.
So of course, it's almost like the writing across the curriculum, like a 1-minute paper or an exit slip to encapsulate the lesson for the generating what it says, generating interaction between schemata and text.
Yes. I'm gonna throw that in the text, in the chat.
As Spock would
Yeah,
say.
and also a good point, Robert, about how, you know, you can use it also as an exit slip, you know, which is how I tended to use the gist within my own classrooms. And luckily for us, it is going to be our own exit slip for today.
It's writing across the curriculum, sir.
So, okay, let's see. Heather, how many folks are with us today?
It looks like we're 24,
Okay, great.
including you and I.
Okay, so what I want us to do, I want us to get into breakout rooms, maybe, you know, 4 or 5 individuals per room. And I want us to create our own gist for today's presentation, right? So summarize today's presentation using exactly 20 words. We're going to get in breakout rooms and you're going to work together to create a gist for today's presentation. And then we're going to share them out as our concluding activity.
All right, so I've got breakout rooms of 4 to 5 people, and we only have about 8 minutes left. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up the rooms if that's okay.
Is this really about the 20-word gist? That's what we're not
Yeah.
filling in the others, right?
Correct. Yeah. Do not worry about you know,
Who,
the
what,
who,
where.
what, where. Yeah. We just want the gist. So we'll give about like 5 minutes. I apologize for the short amount of time, but we'll give about 5 minutes for you guys to work on that, and then we'll come back, share out, and then we will conclude today's presentation. Great, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Breakout room sessions are never long enough. I know. I apologize. Okay, so we have time for 1 or 2 groups to share out their 20-word gist. So we have some space for that. Does anybody want to share? I'm using my fingers to count too. How many words?
The presenter has offered strategies for helping our students learn from their mistakes. We should model appropriate growth set behaviors.
Great. Thank you.
We did model the process and thinking to help students develop growth mindset and error analysis to build resilience in students. 19 words.
Thank you. Okay.
Ours
So,
is, oh, sorry.
no, go for it.
Ours is a bit longer, but we're fillers, you know, we can omit those. Correcting errors in an engaging, not insulting process that focuses on growth mindset to keep everyone comfortable in lower effective filters.
Oh, great. Thank you. All right, perfect. I mean, that was perfect. Great. Thank you so much for everybody for participating. You know, in conclusion, I just want to say, you know, learning and expertise, right, is not static, right? It's a continuous process. Learning is one of the most vulnerable things teachers can ask students to do, right? So creating this environment for learning and cultivating learning partnerships, right, with students is very important. So Heather, you know, placed the evaluation form in the chat for everybody to please fill out at your convenience. Thank you so much for your time and your questions and your discussion today. I truly appreciated all of the participation, and it was great to see familiar faces. I hope everybody is well, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Indicate that you'd be sending this out to us.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
I will grab the attendance list from Heather, and I will be sending a debrief email for everybody.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. I love it.